The gunshot echoed across the moonlit prairie as Colt Brannigan's horse stumbled, blood streaming from its flank. Behind him, 3 riders thundered closer, their voices carrying threats that made his jaw clench. He pressed his spurs deeper, knowing that every second counted Rosalind's life depended on reaching Willowbrook before dawn. The debt collector's words still rang in his ears from earlier that evening, 24 hours. Brannigan, that's all the mercy you get before we take the girl to pay what her father owed. Colt had watched from the shadows as Maddox Crane's men surrounded the Thornfield homestead, seen the terror in Rosalind's amber eyes as they dragged her father's lifeless body from the barn. Old Jeremiah Thornfield had borrowed heavily from Crane's operation, gambling away everything on failed cattle drives and worthless mining claims. Now his daughter would pay the ultimate price sold to the highest. Bitter in Crane's underground auction house, his horse's breathing grew labored, foam gathering at its mouth. The pursuing riders were gaining ground, their torches cutting through the darkness like angry stars. Colt knew these men: Viper Kellen, Dutch Morrison, and the half-breed tracker they called Nightshade. All 3 were Crane's enforcers, men who'd kill without hesitation. A bullet whined past his ear, splintering the bark of a passing oak. Colt yanked his rifle from its scabbard and twisted in the saddle, firing blind into the darkness. One of the torches wavered and fell, followed by a string of curses that told him he'd found his mark. "That's for threatening her," shouted into the wind. The memory of Rosalind's kiss 3 nights ago burned in his chest. They'd met by the old covered bridge where she'd confessed her father's debts and the terrible bargain Crane had proposed. She'd tried to convince Colt to run, to save himself, but he'd silenced her fears with promises he intended to keep. "I'll find a way," he'd whispered against her hair. "I won't let them take you." Now, as his wounded horse began to falter, those promises felt as fragile as morning frost. The lights of Willowbrook twinkled in the distance, still miles away. Behind him, Dutch Morrison's voice boomed across the prairie. "Give it up, Brannigan. You can't outrun us forever." Colt's mind raced through his options. He could make a stand here, fight them with his remaining ammunition, but that would only delay the inevitable. Or he could trust in the desperate plan that had been forming. Since he'd first learned of Rosalind's predicament, he reached into his saddlebag, fingers closing around the leather pouch that contained everything he owned: his life savings, his grandfather's gold watch, and the deed to his small ranch. It wasn't enough to pay Thornfield's debt, but it might buy him the time he needed to execute the only plan that could save the woman he loved. As his horse stumbled again, Colt made his choice. He veered toward the rocky outcropping ahead where the old Cherokee Trail wound through Devil's Canyon. It was dangerous in daylight, nearly suicidal at night, but it offered something the open prairie didn't: a chance to disappear, to reach Willowbrook through the back routes that only he knew. Chase was far from over, but Colt Brannigan had survived worse odds. And somewhere in that distant town, Rosalind Thornfield was counting on him to prove that love could triumph over greed, that a cowboy's promise was worth more than any debt. Dawn painted the canyon walls crimson as Colt finally emerged from Devil's Canyon, his horse lathered in near collapse. The treacherous night ride had cost him precious time, but he'd lost his pursuers in the maze of rock formations and hidden trails. Now, as Willowbrook's church bell tower came into view, he felt the first stirrings of hope. The town was already stirring to life, smoke rising from chimneys as the honest folk began their daily routines. But Colt knew that beneath this peaceful facade, Maddox Crane's empire of vice operated like a cancer, corrupting everything it touched. The man owned half the businesses in town, including the saloon where his auctions took place. Colt's horse finally gave out just outside the livery stable. Old Henrik Larson, the stable master, rushed out as Colt dismounted, catching the exhausted animal before it could collapse completely. "Good Lord, son, what have you done to this poor beast?" Weathered face creased with concern as he examined the bullet wound. "I need your fastest horse, Henrik, and I need it now." Colt pressed a gold eagle into the old man's palm. This is life or death. Henrik's eyes widened at the generous payment, but his expression remained skeptical. "That mare of yours won't Be ready to ride for a week, assuming she survives. But Maddox Crane's been asking about you all morning. His men are posted at every road leading out of town. Colt's blood ran cold. What do you mean, asking about me? Word is you've been interfering? With his business arrangements. Something about the Thornfield girl? Henrik lowered his voice. Son, whatever fool notion you got in your head about crossing Crane, you'd best forget it. That man's got more blood on his hands than a frontier surgeon. Before Colt could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made both men turn. 3 riders rounded the corner, not his original pursuers, but fresh men bearing Crane's distinctive black armbands. At their head rode Silas Grimm, Crane's most feared lieutenant, a man whose smile was said to be the last thing many had seen. Well, well, Grimm called out, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. If it isn't the heroic Colt Brannigan, come to rescue his fair maiden. Colt's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but Grimm raised a warning finger. I wouldn't. If I were you, my boys have you covered from 3 angles, and Henrik here has a wife and grandchildren to think about. The old stablemaster paled, stepping protectively in front of his workshop. What do you want, Grimm? Colt's voice was steady, despite the rage building in his chest. Mr. Crane would like a word. Seems there's been some misunderstanding about Miss Thornfield's situation. Grimm's smile widened, revealing gold teeth. He's prepared to discuss terms. Colt knew it was a trap, but he also knew he had no choice. Every minute he delayed was another minute closer to the auction that would seal Rosalind's fate. Where? The Brass Dollar Saloon. 1 hour. Grimm tipped his hat mockingly. Oh, and Brannigan, come alone and come unarmed. Mr. Crane values his privacy during business negotiations. As the 3 riders departed, Henrik grabbed Colt's arm. Don't do this, son. Crane's never let a man walk away from one of his negotiations alive. But Colt was already planning his next move. He had 1 hour to prepare, 1 chance to save the woman he loved. In his pocket, the leather pouch felt heavier than ever. Not heavy enough to buy Rosalind's freedom, but perhaps heavy enough to buy time for the plan that was crystallizing in his mind. Henrik, he said quietly, I need you to do something. For me, in 30 minutes, I want you to ride to the telegraph office and send a message to the federal marshal in Denver. Tell him Maddox Crane is running a human trafficking operation in Willowbrook. Henrik's eyes widened. You're going to bring the law down on him? I'm going to do whatever it takes, Colt replied, checking his guns one final time before hiding them in Henrik's grain barrel. And if I don't make it out of that saloon, make sure that message gets sent anyway. The Brass Dollar Saloon reeked of stale whiskey and desperation as Colt pushed through the batwing doors exactly 1 hour later. The morning crowd had been cleared. Out, leaving only Crane's men scattered throughout the room like vultures waiting for carrion. At the far end, Maddox Crane sat behind a poker table, his massive frame draped in an expensive suit that couldn't hide the predator beneath. Punctual, Crane observed, his voice carrying the hint of a European accent that he'd never quite shed. I appreciate that in a man about to die. Colt's eyes swept the room, counting 6 armed men plus Crane and Grimm. Behind the bar, the bartender, nervous little man named Percy, polished glasses with trembling hands. I'm here to negotiate, Colt said evenly. Let's talk terms. Crane laughed, a sound like grinding millstones. Terms, boy, you cost me 3 good men last night. Viper Kellen's nursing a bullet wound, and Dutch Morrison's horse broke its leg. In that fool chase you led them on? He leaned forward, his pale eyes glittering with malice. The only terms we're discussing are how slowly you want to die. I can pay Thornfield's debt, Colt said, producing the leather pouch from his pocket. Every cent, plus interest. $15,000? Crane's eyebrows rose mockingly. You got that much in that little bag? Colt's heart sank. Known. Thornfield owed money, but $15,000 was a fortune more than most men saw in a lifetime. His savings, generous as they were for a working cowboy, wouldn't cover even a quarter of that amount. I see understanding dawning in those pretty blue eyes of yours, Crane continued. Old Jeremiah Thornfield didn't just owe me money for gambling. Debts. He borrowed against his land, his cattle, even his daughter's virtue. When a man makes promises he can't keep, Someone has to pay the price. The girl's innocent in this, Colt said through gritted teeth. Innocent. Crane's laugh turned cruel. Son, innocence is a luxury in this world. Little Philly's got value, and I intend to collect. My buyers in San Francisco pay top dollar for fresh stock, especially when it comes with such ... fire. Rage clouded Colt's vision, and it took every ounce of self-control not to reach for guns that weren't there. Name your price. I'll work for you. Do whatever you want. Just let her go. Now that's interesting. Crane stroked his gray beard thoughtfully. You'd indenture yourself to me? Come my property? Just like she's about to become someone else's? That's what it takes. 10 years of service? You do whatever I say whenever I say it. Robbery, murder, collecting debts, all of it. And at the end of 10 years, if you're still breathing, maybe I'll consider us even. Colt felt the trap closing around him. But he also heard something else, the distant sound of hoofbeats approaching the saloon. Multiple riders, moving fast. Henrik had sent that telegram, and it seemed the law was finally coming to Willowbrook. Colt said loudly, making sure every man in the room heard him. 10 years of my life for Rosalind Thornfield's freedom. Crane's smile faltered slightly. Something in Colt's tone, too confident for a man about to become a slave, made him suspicious. Grim checked the street. But before his lieutenant could move, the saloon doors exploded inward. Federal Marshal Jake Hawthorne strode in with 6 deputies, all wearing badges and carrying rifles. Behind them came a figure that made Colt's heart. Lee Prosland herself, her amber eyes blazing with determination. Nobody move! Hawthorne's voice boomed through the saloon. This establishment is surrounded by federal agents. Maddox Crane, you're under arrest for human trafficking, murder, and racketeering. Chaos erupted as Crane's men reached for their guns. But Colt was already moving, diving behind the bar as bullets began flying. Percy, the bartender, screamed and dropped to the floor. But not before pointing toward a hidden compartment where emergency weapons were kept. Colt's hands closed around a familiar, await his own guns, somehow returned to their rightful place. He looked up to see Rosalind crouched behind an overturned table, a smoking derringer in her small hand. Did you really think I'd wait to be rescued? She called out over the gunfire, her voice carrying that same fierce spirit that had made him fall in love with her. The battle for Willowbrook, their future had finally begun. Gunfire shattered the morning air as the Brass Dollar Saloon became a battlefield. Colt rolled behind the heavy oak bar, bullets splintering the wood above his head. Through the chaos, he could see Rosalind pressed against an overturned poker table, her face pale but determined. She'd somehow freed herself and brought the law, but they weren't out of danger yet. You federal bastards picked the wrong town. Maddox Crane roared, his massive Colt .45 barking as he fired at Marshal Hawthorne. The lawman ducked behind a support beam, splinters exploding around him. Silas Grimm had positioned himself near the back stairs, his rifle picking off anyone who tried to approach Crane's position. 2 of the marshal's deputies were already down, blood pooling beneath their still forms. The remaining lawmen had taken cover, but they were outnumbered and pinned down. Brannigan. Crane's voice cut through the din. This is all you're doing. When I'm finished with these badge-wearing fools, I'm going to make you watch what I do to your little girlfriend before I kill you both. That was the last straw. Colt vaulted over the bar, his twin Colts blazing. His first shot took down one of Crane's men who was advancing on Rosalind's position. His second punched through the shoulder of another, spinning the man around like a child's top. Colt Rosalind's warning cry came just in time. He dove sideways as Grimm's rifle bullet passed through the space where his head had been. The shot went wide, shattering a mirror behind the bar and sending glass cascading to the floor. Marshal Hawthorne took advantage of the distraction to advance, his badge glinting in the dusty sunlight streaming through bullet-riddled windows. Crane, give it up. You're surrounded and outgunned. Like hell I am. Crane grabbed Percy, the bartender, hauling the terrified man up as a human shield. His gun pressed against Percy's temple, sweat streaming down the little man's face. Everybody back off, or Percy here gets ventilated. The gunfire died too sporadic. Pops, as both sides reassessed. Colt found himself in a deadly standoff, his guns trained on Grim, while the lieutenant's rifle remained fixed on him. Neither man dared fire first. Rosalind Colt called softly, not taking his eyes off Grim. "Can you reach the door?" "Not without exposing myself to his rifle," she replied, gesturing toward Grim with her small derringer. That's when Colt noticed something that made his heart race with hope. Behind Grim, barely visible in the shadows of the back stairway, another figure was moving. Old Henrik had somehow gotten into the building through the rear entrance. He was carrying something that looked suspiciously like a shotgun. "Know what your problem is, Crane?" Colt said loudly, playing for time. "You never learned the first rule of this territory." "And what's that, boy?" "Never underestimate a cowboy in love." It was the signal Henrik had been waiting for. The old stablemaster's shotgun boomed like thunder, catching Grim in the back and sending him crashing into a card table. Colt spun and fired in the same instant, his bullet taking down the last of Crane's visible gunmen. But Crane still had Percy, and his eyes had gone wild with desperation. "I'll kill him. I swear I'll blow his brains out."
"I know,"
a new voice said from the saloon's second floor. "You won't." Everyone looked up to see a figure silhouetted in the window above a woman in riding clothes with a rifle trained on Crane's head. It was Cordelia Blackthorne, the mysterious widow who owned the biggest ranch outside Willowbrook, and who, Colt now realized, had been working with the federal marshals all along. "Your move, Maddox," she said calmly. "But if you pull that trigger, you'll be dead before Percy hits the floor." The standoff stretched taut as a violin string. Sweat poured down Crane's face as he calculated his odds. Percy whimpered. His eyes rolled back in terror. The marshal and his remaining deputies waited with fingers on triggers. Then Rosalind did something that would be talked about in Willowbrook for decades to come. She stood up, completely exposing herself to any hidden gunman, and walked slowly toward Crane with her hands empty and visible. "Mr. Crane," she said in a voice steady as church bells, "you wanted me as payment for my father's debt? Well, here I am. Let Percy go, and I'll come with you willingly. No more fighting, no more bloodshed." "Rosalind, no." Colt started toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. "It's my choice, Colt," she said, never taking her eyes off Crane. "My father's debt, my responsibility." But as she spoke, Colt saw the slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth, and he understood. This brave, brilliant woman had a plan. Of her own, Rosalind continued her slow approach toward Maddox Crane, each step deliberate and mesmerizing. The entire saloon held its breath as she moved through the debris and broken glass.
"Ow."
Her amber eyes locked on the crime boss who held Percy's life in his sweaty hands. "It's close enough, girl," Crane snarled, but Colt could hear the uncertainty in his voice. This wasn't how the man operated. He was used to fear and violence, not young women offering themselves as sacrifice. "I said I'd come willingly," Rosalind continued, her voice carrying an odd, hypnotic quality. "But I need to know that you're a man of your word. Let Percy go first. You think I'm stupid?" Crane's gun hand was shaking slightly, sweat beading on his forehead. "The moment I release him, your boyfriend there puts a bullet in my brain." "Look around you, Mr. Crane," Rosalind said, gesturing to the carnage surrounding them. "Half your men are dead or wounded. Federal marshals have the building surrounded. Even if you killed me and poor Percy, where exactly do you think you're going to go?" She was now close enough that Colt could see the barely perceptible signals she was making with her left hand. The same hand signals they'd developed as children, when they used to hunt together in the woods around her father's ranch. 3 seconds, her fingers told him. "But if you let him go," Rosalind continued, "if you show mercy to an innocent man, maybe there's a chance for negotiation. Maybe there's a way out of this that doesn't end with you face down in sawdust." Crane's pale eyes darted around the room, taking in the federal agents, Cordelia Blackthorne still positioned above with her rifle, and Colt's unwavering guns trained on him. For a moment, his grip on Percy seemed to loosen. "Besides," Rosalind added, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, "I have something you might find more valuable than one terrified bartender. What could you possibly have that I'd want?" Rosalind smiled, and even in the midst of this deadly standoff, Colt felt his heart skip a beat at the fierce beauty of it. "Information about your competition. about the other trafficking operations moving through this territory. Names, routes, schedules, everything my father discovered before he died. Crane's eyes widened with greed. Jeremiah knew about the others. Do you think he was so deep in debt? He wasn't just gambling, Mr. Crane. He was paying for information, building a map of every illegal operation between here and the Mexican border. Rosalind took another step closer. Information that could make you the most powerful man west of the Mississippi or see you hanged if it falls into the wrong hands. It was a masterful bluff, but Colt could see that Crane was buying it. The man's grip on Percy had loosened further, his attention completely focused on Rosalind's words. Where is this information? Crane demanded. "Hidden," Rosalind replied. "Somewhere only I know. Let Percy go, and we'll discuss terms." Crane hesitated for one crucial heartbeat too long. In that moment of indecision, three things happened simultaneously. Percy went completely limp in a dead faint. Cordelia Blackthorne's rifle cracked from above, and Colt launched himself across the room in a desperate tackle. The bullet from Cordelia's rifle took Crane in the shoulder, spinning him around. Colt's body slammed into the massive man with the force of a charging bull, both of them crashing through a table in an explosion of splintered wood and flying cards. They rolled across the floor, Crane's superior size and weight giving him the advantage despite his wound. His meaty hands found Colt's throat, squeezing with murderous intent. Black spots began dancing at the edges of Colt's vision as he fought to break free. "Should have minded your own business, cowboy," Crane gasped, blood streaming from his shoulder wound. "Now you get to die knowing your girlfriend's going to wish she'd never been born." But Colt had one advantage that Crane didn't know about. As they'd struggled, his hand had found the small knife he kept hidden in his boot, the same knife that had saved his life during his cavalry days. With the last of his strength, he drove the blade up and into Crane's side. Finding the gap between ribs with the precision of desperation, Crane's eyes went wide with shock and pain. His grip on Colt's throat loosened, and he toppled backward, clutching the wound. You little federal marshal." Hawthorne's voice boomed through the saloon as he stepped forward, his badge gleaming. "Maddox Crane, you're under arrest. For human trafficking, murder, and about 15 other charges that'll see you hanged twice over." As the marshal's remaining deputies moved in to secure the scene, Colt felt gentle hands helping him to his feet. He looked up into Rosalind's concerned face, her amber eyes shining with unshed tears. "That was the stupidest, most heroic thing I've ever seen," she whispered, her fingers tracing the bruises on his throat. "Says the woman who just bluffed the most dangerous man in the territory with a story about secret information." Colt managed to croak, while Rosalind said with that same fierce smile that had captivated him since childhood, "I learned from the best. My father really was investigating the trafficking routes. I just didn't mention that he hid all his findings in our old treehouse. And they're mostly sketches of birds and poetry about missing my mother." Despite everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the knowledge that they'd both nearly died, Colt began to laugh. And as federal agents secured the scene and tended to the wounded, he pulled the woman he loved into his arms, knowing that the worst was finally behind them. But as they stood among the wreckage of the Brass Dollar Saloon, neither of them noticed. The figure watching from the shadows across the street, one of Crane's men who had escaped the raid, his hand already reaching for the telegram he would send to the criminal network's backers in San Francisco. The battle for Willowbrook was won. But the war might just be beginning. 3 days after the showdown at the Brass Dollar Saloon, Willowbrook buzzed with nervous energy. Federal agents occupied the hotel, conducting interviews and gathering evidence. While Maddox Crane lay shackled to a bed in Doc Patterson's clinic, his shoulder wound healing slowly under guard. The town felt different somehow, as if a dark cloud had lifted. But everyone remained wary of what storms might still be brewing. Colt sat on the porch of the Thornfield homestead, watching Rosalind tend to her father's grave marker. She'd insisted on burying Jeremiah properly, despite everything he'd done. Her capacity for forgiveness amazed him. Even as he struggled with his own darker impulses toward the man whose debts had nearly cost her everything. "Marshall wants to see us both this afternoon," he called out to her. "Says there's been developments." Rosalind looked up from the wildflowers she was arranging on the grave. What kind of developments? Before Colt could answer, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats made them both turn. A lone rider was approaching fast, too fast for casual travel. As the figure drew closer, Colt recognized Felipe Montoya, one of the Mexican vaqueros who worked the ranches south of town. Senator Brannigan. Felipe called out as he reined in his lathered horse. You must come quickly. They have taken Senora Blackthorne. Colt's blood ran cold. Cordelia Blackthorne, the mysterious widow who had helped them during the saloon battle, was one of the few people in the territory with the resources and connections to stand against organized crime. If someone had taken her, who? Rosalind demanded, moving to stand beside Colt. Who took her? Men with no faces, Felipe said, his English heavily accented but clear. They wore masks, rode horses, with no brands. But they left this. He produced a folded paper from his vest, found it nailed to her front door. Colt unfolded the message, his jaw tightening as he read, The woman who killed our associate will pay for her interference. Come alone to Devil's Canyon at midnight, or we start sending pieces of her back to town. Tell the federal dogs that this is outside their jurisdiction. Now this is family business. The message was signed with a symbol that made Colt's heart sink, a coiled serpent wrapped around a dagger. He'd seen that mark before, during his cavalry days along the Mexican border. It belonged to the Hermanos de la Sombra, the Brotherhood of Shadows, one of the most vicious criminal organizations in the Southwest. They're Crane's backers, he told Rosalind grimly. The ones who supplied him with money and connections. Then we tell Marshal Hawthorne immediately, she said. This is exactly what federal agents are for. But Colt was already shaking his head. You read the message. We've got lookouts, probably been watching the town since the raid. If they see federal agents heading toward Devil's Canyon, Cordelia dies. So what are you suggesting? You ride into an obvious trap? It's not a trap if I don't spring it the way they expect. Colt's mind was already working through the possibilities. Felipe, how many men did you see? 6, maybe 7? But Sinner, there could be more waiting in the canyon. Rosalind grabbed Colt's arm. This is insane. We just got out of one impossible situation. I won't lose you to another. And I won't let an innocent woman die because she helped us. Colt replied. Cordelia saved our lives in that saloon. I owe her. We owe her, Rosalind corrected firmly. Which means we do this together. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. Colt Brannigan, if you think I'm going to sit here wringing my hands while you ride off to be a hero again, you don't know me as well as you think you do. Her amber eyes flashed with determination. Besides, I know Devil's Canyon better than anyone. My father used to take me hunting there when I was a child. Felipe cleared his throat. Pardon, but there is something else. When I was tracking these men, I found something strange. They made camp near the old Cherokee burial ground. But the horses, they were not resting. They were nervous, like something had spooked them badly. Colt and Rosalind exchanged glances. The Cherokee burial ground was rumored to be protected by the spirits of ancient warriors. But more practically, it was also riddled with natural caves and hidden passages that the local Apache had used for generations. If someone or something was making the horses nervous, there might be others there already, Colt mused. Local fighters who don't take kindly to strangers desecrating sacred ground? Or it could be another trap, Rosalind pointed out. Only one way to find out. Colt was already moving toward the barn where he'd stabled Henrik's fastest horse. Felipe, I need you to ride to town and tell Marshal Hawthorne what's happened. Tell him to give us until dawn, then come in force. And if you are not alive at dawn, Colt checked his guns, ensuring both were fully loaded. Then make sure he brings enough men to finish what we started. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Colt and Rosalind prepared for what might be their final ride together. The stakes had never been higher, and their enemies had never been more dangerous. But as they rode toward Devil's Canyon with shadows lengthening around them, both felt a strange sense of completion. Whatever happened in the hours ahead, they would face it together, just as they'd always been meant to, in the distance. A lone coyote howled, whether in warning or in greeting, neither of them could say. The moon hung like a silver dollar in the star-scattered sky as Colt and Rosalind approached Devil's Canyon on foot, their horses hidden a mile back in a grove of cottonwoods. The ancient rock formations loomed around them like sleeping giants, and somewhere in this maze of stone and shadow, Cordelia Blackthorne was being held prisoner. "There," Rosalind whispered, pointing toward a flickering campfire deep in the canyon. "But something's wrong. Count only 3 men around that fire, and they're all sitting too still." Colt studied the scene through his field glasses, a chill running down his spine. She was right, the figures by the fire weren't moving naturally. They sat like scarecrows, propped up and motionless. "It's a trap," he murmured. "The real ambush is somewhere else." A soft whistle echoed from the rocks above them. The call of any bird Colt recognized. It was answered by another whistle. From the opposite side of the canyon, then another. They were surrounded. "Well, well," a voice called out in accented English. The famous Colt Brannigan, right on time. He brought his lady friend. How romantic. A figure emerged from behind a boulder 30 yards away, a tall man in Mexican dress with silver concos glinting on his jacket. Even in the moonlight, Colt could see the coiled serpent tattoo on the man's neck. "I am Alejandro Vasquez, lieutenant of the Hermanos de la Sombra. You've killed our business partner, Senator Crane. This is very inconvenient for us." "Crane brought it on himself," Colt called back. "Where's Mrs. Blackthorne?" "Ah, the widow, she is. Safe for now, but her continued health depends on your cooperation." Vasquez gestured and more figures emerged from concealment. At least 8 men, all armed with rifles and positioned to create a killing field. "What do you want?" "Simple. You and your woman will take Crane's place. We will run our operations in this territory, and in exchange, the widow lives. Refuse, and we kill all 3 of you and find someone more compliant. And if we agree, then you belong to us, just as Crane did, forever." Rosalind's hand found Colt's in the darkness, squeezing once their old signal for "trust me." She stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly across the canyon. "Before we decide anything," she called out, "we'd like to see proof that Mrs. Blackthorne is still alive." Vasquez laughed. "Of course, Carlos. Bring the woman." One of his men disappeared into a cave opening, returning moments later with Cordelia Blackthorne, even at a distance. Colt could see she'd been roughly handled. Her expensive riding dress was torn, and she moved stiffly as if injured. But as she was brought into the firelight, Cordelia did something that made Colt's heart leap with hope. She stumbled, apparently from weakness. But in that stumble, she managed to knock over a can of kerosene that had been sitting by the fire. The liquid spread in a dark pool, its sharp smell carrying on the night wind. "Satisfied?" Vasquez called. "Out," very Rosalind replied. Then, her voice dropping to a whisper only Colt could hear, she added, "When I give the signal, shoot the fire." Before Colt could ask what she meant, Rosalind was moving. She pulled something from her pocket. A small mirror she'd brought from her father's house, angled it to catch the moonlight. The reflected beam danced across the canyon walls in a pattern that looked random, but WASN, single quotes, T. Ancient Cherokee signal code. Something her father had taught her from his days as an army scout. From the darkness above came an answering flash. Then, another? They weren't alone after all. The local Apache, guardians of the soccer,